largest energy project in BC's history.
They're proud of what they're doing here, which is the sad thing.
Built on Treaty 8 territory.
We need people to stand with us and say, you know, this is wrong.
Under fire from insiders.
Probably end up being among the highest ratepayers in this country.
Too late to turn back?
Benefits of it are going to be a generation of clean, green power.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamarand. Tonight on APTN Investigates, British Columbia's Site C Dam has been billed as the best solution for the future energy needs of the province. A multi-billion-dollar mega project meant to provide affordable power for the next 100 years. Located in the heart of Treaty 8 territory, the project has come under fire. Industry insiders believe it's a bad deal financially. Local homesteaders have been told to pack up and leave. And First Nations fear the project will destroy their traditional way of life. Has Site C reached the point of no return? In order to answer that question, Cullen Crozier traveled to the Peace River Valley.
You can't separate the land and the Dundee-Zaw. They're one and the same. You know, so anything that happens to the land happens directly to us.
As a landowner and a farmer and a rancher, your property is your livelihood, and you're stewards of the land in a way that you know, you keep looking after it to the best of your ability.
Once the land is gone, that is land that cannot be used, and yet land where we cannot practice our rights. That's the part. And the more that you destroy in the land, then everything is affected. The balance of nature, natural law, becomes much different.
BC's Peace River Valley has become ground zero for one of the most heated energy debates in the country. Located in the heart of Treaty 8 territory, this 83-kilometer stretch of valley is slated to be cleared and flooded. It's all part of the province's proposed Site C Dam, an estimated $9 billion mega project, mired in controversy.
We are the Dundee-Zaw, the original inhabitants of northeastern BC. We have had feet on the ground, boots on the ground for over 10,000 years here.
Roland Wilson is chief of the West Moberly First Nation, one of two Aboriginal groups that are taking BC Hydro and the federal government to court in an attempt to stop the project. The court challenge hinges on meaningful consultation and whether or not Site C infringes on constitutionally protected treaty rights.
As soon as this process started, we were very clear with everybody that we're not opposed to the development of the energy. What we're opposed to is the unnecessary destruction of this valley. They don't have to flood this valley in order to produce that energy.
And there's a lot at stake. Construction of Site C is expected to impact over 57,000 acres of land. Traditional hunting, fishing, and trapping grounds sacred to the Deniza people.
Well, what you see down here, all the low-lying areas, up to the base of the hill here, will all be underwater. You know, they're proposing to clear-cut all this and get rid of all the vegetation, the trees and stuff. But where we're standing here will be 10 feet, 20 feet underwater here.
It's a massive undertaking. Site C will be the largest public infrastructure project in BC's history, one that Premier Christy Clark has committed to push past the point of no return. Her government is convinced the dam is the best solution for the future energy needs of BC.
You know, it's not just some faraway place where nobody lives. This is our home. And this is what's at risk at being destroyed with Site C for no reason.
This is what preliminary construction work looks like at Site C. In just over 1 year, BC Hydro has cleared over 900 hectares of land, roughly the size of 2,000 football fields. It's something of a daily reminder for Esther Peterson. Her family home and ranch rests on the banks of the Peace River, just across from the construction site.
Well, it's supposed to be our retirement home. Yeah. Come on, boys.
Peterson is at a crossroads. She's being forced to leave the home and business that her family has spent nearly 20 years building. told that once the valley is flooded, her property will no longer be livable.
Now the line runs through this big hay shed and straight along our property, and it's over 50% of our property is now behind this stability line.
And she's not alone. Peterson is one of more than 30 landowners living along the Peace River Valley, whose homes fall within the flood zone and will be destroyed if the project moves ahead. BC Hydro is in the process of negotiating settlement agreements for the properties, and according to Peterson, it's take it or leave it.
When they come to consult, they come to your house, they open it up, they've got the smart guy and his amener beside him, and they tell you this, and they say, we're building a dam, your house is behind the stability line, you can either sell now or sell later.
It's a story echoed by a number of residents living along the Peace River. Farmers, ranchers, and landowners like Arlene Boone, whose livelihoods are directly tied to the valley. Boone's connections to the land run deep. Her family has called this small farm home for 3 generations.
It's priceless, you know, you can't put a price on something that's part of family and always has been. Come on, you guys.
According to Boone, BC Hydro has given her family until Christmas to vacate their farm. Told if they refuse to sell, their land will be expropriated to realign more than 8 kilometers of highway.
Right now, BC Hydro has the proposed highway going right through our house, goes right through the campground, and it goes right through all the other homes on this flat, all the way to the other end of Bear Flat. And they will not move the highway one way or the other. They're putting it right through all the homes.
The highway realignment isn't the only work that's taking place on the Boone's farm. Teams of archaeologists with BC Hydro are also working around the clock to identify and preserve historical artifacts before they are lost forever. And it's what they're finding that has Chief Wilson so concerned. The Peace River Valley is home to some of the oldest archaeological sites in Western Canada, dating back more than 12,000 years.
This is a historic spot where our people came and gathered. So anywhere through here is you're going to find traces of our people here. And knowing that they know that this is a burial site. We've asked them to stop and not do this out of respect to the grave sites, but they've ignored us.
So this is your first time being here?
This is the first time for me seeing this.
What do you make of it?
They've obviously found something. Usually they come in and do a little 1 meter, 1 square foot kind of a thing. And if they see something or they find something, they go bigger. So they obviously found something here.
And with new test plots being unearthed each day, the conservation efforts only reinforce the sense of urgency felt throughout the valley. It's a frustrating process for West Moberly community members like Dean Doki.
It's been a long battle, but it's not to the point where we're giving up. It's to the point where we're saying we need to fight even harder. And it is a big issue because it affects every treaty in Canada.
With the Liberal government's commitment to establish a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Canada's Indigenous people, Site C has put that promise to the test.
You know, we know what the strategy is to get it to that point where they've invested so much that the courts will say that it's not going to happen. But the reality is it doesn't have to happen.
To get a first-hand look at Site C, Wilson and Doki are taking a trip downstream to the Rocky Mountain Fort site, an historic First Nations encampment just feet away from where the main construction is taking place. Along for the ride is local rancher Mark Myers. Myers isn't afraid to speak his mind when it comes to Site C.
They don't have a legal authority to stop us.
Yeah.
But they run this fear and intimidation tactic by us like they've been doing ever since and expect people to pay attention to it. Well, I ignore them. They're a bunch of bullies.
Bullies or not, the provincial government isn't wasting any time dumping serious money and resources into the project. And even with the ongoing court challenges and growing opposition, construction continues 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As Site C moves closer to the point of no return, halting the project has become a race against time for the people of the valley.
After the break, as the provincial government races to push Site C past the point of no return, we take a closer look at some of the facts and figures behind the mega project. Before the break, we met with concerned residents living along the Peace River Valley directly impacted by Site C. Has the mega project reached the point of no return? Cullen Crozier traveled downstream to find out.
The Rocky Mountain Fort site has become a symbol of the growing grassroots opposition to Site C. Last winter, the historic First Nations encampment was clear-cut and logged by BC Hydro.
Yeah, they're trying to call you on the 911 channel. I believe it's Eric.
The man taking pictures is with Soto Safety and Security. Soto is one of 3 First Nations that have signed impact benefit agreements with BC Hydro over Site C.
So we know we're not supposed to be here. There's a court injunction in place.
You know, we got security boats here telling us that we're not allowed to stand on our land. Right? This is the Rocky Mountain Fort. This is where my people and Councillor Dean's people have been coming for 1,000 years. You know, and now we're being chased off because of some stupid project that somebody conceived 50 years ago.
This ain't the last one, that's for sure.
So how has Site C managed to stay feasible after all these years? Keep in mind, the project has been rejected twice in the past and continues to be opposed by a wide range of leading experts. To help shed some light on those questions, we've gone straight to the source.
You have to have that view to the future. It's not about building for today, it's about building for the future.
This is the power of BC.
And it's those future energy needs that are paramount. According to BC Hydro, the province's demand for electricity will increase by approximately 40% during the next 20 years. It's a demand the Crown Corporation won't be able to meet with their current supply. David Conway is the company's point man on the project.
What Site C provides is, when complete, it provides 1,100 megawatts of firm capacity. What that means is that on January the 20th in the year 2035, you know you can count on that energy instantaneously.
This isn't the first time that BC Hydro has had to convince the public about the urgent need and potential benefits of Site C. Since the project was taken off the shelf in 2007, Conway says the company has made community engagement one of their top priorities.
We're out consulting, we're out talking to the people about the potential impacts, about looking for ways to avoid, about ways to mitigate the impacts of the project. Knowing that it does impact people, it impacts hunting, fishing, and treaty rights.
To help assess some of those impacts, the federal and provincial governments turned to Dr. Harry Swain. Swain chaired the Joint Review Panel for Site C. His team evaluated the environmental, economic, and social effects the project could have on the valley.
All right.
With one exception.
The terms of reference were rather specific. We were, for example, told not to make final conclusions on whether there had been treaty infringement or on whether there had been adequate consultation, accommodation. Those were questions that were left for lawyers after the fact, if you will.
But answering those questions is easier said than done. To this day, top legal experts across the country still can't come to a general consensus regarding consultation and treaty infringement. But that hasn't stopped Swain from forming his own opinion.
My feeling at the time was that there was evidence of treaty infringement, that the powers that be would understand that and would take appropriate actions. In fact, they didn't seem to do very much.
That doesn't sit well with Chief Wilson. He wasn't surprised the panel was told to ignore the question of treaty. In fact, he's come to expect it.
To me, that aspect of the project was as important as any aspect of the project. The rights of the First Nations are constitutionally protected, you know, especially for Treaty 8. You know, there's been numerous court cases saying that, you know, you have to take that into consideration.
Regardless, there are still a number of Treaty 8 First Nations who fully support Site C and stand to benefit economically from the project.
We have a number of agreements with First Nations communities. There are Aboriginal businesses directly involved in supplying and helping to construct the project, and there are many Aboriginal workers working on the project. So there's opposition to the project, but at the same time there's also support, expertise, supply coming in as well.
You may not know everything that goes on in your home, but you can know about your electricity use.
While BC Hydro is convinced the province's energy needs will increase, the current demand for power has actually flatlined in the last decade. With no immediate need for the energy, the dam is expected to lose at least $800 million in the first 4 years of production. Mark Ellison is the former CEO of BC Hydro. He says ratepayers can expect an increase of up to 40% in their electricity bill to pay the difference.
There is no economic case for building Site C. The long-term damage to First Nations, to agricultural production, but mainly on the economics. Like, there's no need for the power project. We don't have a demand for it. And if there was a demand that people are forecasting 20 years from now, there are all sorts of alternatives.
When Site C was first rejected over 30 years ago, the province was told to investigate some of those alternatives. But according to critics like Swain and Ellison, that hasn't been the case.
There's always been a bias towards hydro development and large hydro development. And that's why we've always had, in the past, an independent authority, objective with experts like the British Columbia Utilities Commission that would evaluate any proposals put forward by BC Hydro for future generation.
But that independent assessment didn't happen this time around. The provincial government calls it regulatory streamlining. Chief Wilson has another word for it.
This whole thing is a sham, right? The BC UC process is set up because BC Hydro is a public utility company. It's owned by the people of BC, right? And they were put in place to make sure that if they were going to spend large quantities of money, that it was justifiably right.
It means 1,500 jobs for British Columbians.
But according to BC Premier Christy Clark, Site C has met those requirements. She stands by BC Hydro's demand forecast and is convinced the project will provide cheap, reliable power for the foreseeable future.
You know, it's been 10 years. It's been in the process. It's been through a rigorous environmental process. We know that most British Columbians really do support it. I think most people understand we want green power. We want the jobs, the 10,000 jobs that come with it, which is great. And we also need to make sure that power remains reasonably low cost for people in British Columbia. That's how we attract and create more jobs for the future.
So where does the federal government stand in all of this? After all, it was the previous Conservative government that originally issued the permits for Site C, going into last year's federal election.
It's time for a change in this country, my friends, a real change.
When the Liberals came to power, the project's opponents hoped it would be re-examined at the federal level. But so far, that hasn't happened.
Trudeau's made his promises about, you know, the relationship with Aboriginal people are his biggest thing. You know, well, obviously not. You know, because it should have started here. This is the biggest project in BC history and one of the biggest projects in Canadian history, and they just ran right over us.
It's a sentiment that was echoed by current Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould in 2012. Then BC Regional Chief for the AFN, she said Site C trampled on Indigenous rights and title.
There are unprecedented developments in our territories, and the legal reality is that Aboriginal people have rights and treaty rights that must be respected.
With Ottawa unwilling to intervene, it now falls on the courts to decide the fate of Site C. So far, all of the cases launched against the project have either been withdrawn or dismissed by the lower courts.
How are you doing there?
Chief Wilson is hoping to have more luck at the federal level, but it's going to be an uphill battle.
If there ever was a David and Goliath issue, this is it, right here. Right, we're going up against BC Hydro, BC, and Canada, you know, and it's two little First Nations, northeastern British Columbia, you know. And if we're going down swinging.
So has Site C reached the point of no return? Even with federal and provincial support, final approval is far from guaranteed. As for the people of the Peace River Valley, they're digging in for the long haul.
It's really up to the people. We need people to stand with us and say, you know, this is wrong, because it is wrong.
We don't want to be in a fight like this. We did everything we could to avoid this fight, but we're not going to back down from the fight.
Past the point of no return in my mind is when the water is rising. It definitely is not past the point of no return.
Growing opposition to Site C doesn't appear to be slowing down. Last month, Chief Wilson led a large caravan of protesters across the country to Parliament Hill. The rally coincided with the start of the federal court challenge against the project. Concern over the treatment of the impacted First Nations also spilled over into the House of Commons.
Will the Prime Minister assume the responsibility to consult instead of bulldozing Aboriginal rights?
We know that we need to move forward on both protecting environmental stability and on protecting economic growth. Canadians expect that, Indigenous Canadians expect that, and we will continue to work with the kind of respect we have always shown towards Indigenous Canadians.
APTN also managed to catch up with Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould to address some of those concerns.
I acknowledge that this is a contentious issue. To be clear, this was a decision by a previous government, and we have been handed a number of decisions that we would have done things differently.
There's no word yet on when the Federal Court of Appeals will make their ruling. Next week, Kathleen Martins has the story of a cancer patient who was kicked out of palliative care. She was an Aboriginal woman in pain, and her family says it was discrimination. That's next week. I'm Todd Lamarand. Have a great evening.